The bullet missed Elena Marchetti by less than an inch, and she did not even blink. She stood outside a black car on a rain-soaked street in Chicago, her hand already reaching for the young woman beside her, pulling her down behind the door before the second shot cracked through the night. Sophia Rossetti screamed, more from shock than pain, as glass rained down over both of them. Elena's eyes scanned the rooftops, counting the seconds between shots, calculating angles the way she had been trained to do years ago in a different life. A life that had nothing to do with mafia families or Italian estates, or men who paid in cash and never asked questions. This was supposed to be a routine escort job. Pick up the boss's sister from a private art gallery, drive her home, keep her safe for one evening. Nothing more. Elena had taken dozens of jobs like this since leaving military service. Jobs that paid well and required nothing but sharp eyes and a steady hand. She had never expected gunfire on her second night working for Dante Rossetti. 3 days earlier, Elena had walked into Dante's office for the first time, unimpressed by the marble floors and the armed men standing at every corner. She had faced worse than intimidation tactics. She had faced real war. The office itself told her more about the man than any file could. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with titles on history and strategy rather than the crime novels she might have expected. A single photograph sat on the desk, turned slightly away from visitors, though Elena caught a glimpse of a woman's face in the frame, someone who looked too much like Sophia to be anyone other than their mother. Dante Rossetti was younger than she expected, maybe 34, with dark eyes that studied her like she was a puzzle he intended to solve within minutes. He did not stand when she entered. He simply gestured to the chair across from his desk and let the silence stretch long enough to be uncomfortable. "You used to be a combat medic," he said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. The kind of thing a man says when he has already read every file on you before you walked through the door. 6 years, Elena said. Then 4 more as private security. And now you want to guard my sister. I don't want anything, Elena said. You called me, I answered. Something flickered behind his eyes, something close to amusement, though his face remained still. Dante was a man who had built a reputation on never showing what he felt, and Elena understood immediately that this job would require patience she had not needed in years. My sister does not like bodyguards, Dante said. She has had 4 this year. She finds ways to lose every one of them. I don't lose people, Elena said simply. Dante studied her for a long moment, then finally nodded once, as if that single sentence had settled something in his mind. You start tomorrow. If you fail, you will not get a second chance. Not because I will punish you, because Sophia will already be gone. The weight in his voice told Elena everything she needed to know about how much this man had already lost. May I ask what happened to the previous 4? Elena said. 2 quit. 1 was reassigned after Sophia convinced him to let her attend a party he had explicitly been told to avoid. The last one, Dante paused, his jaw tightening slightly. The last one was not good enough when it mattered. What happened to him? He is alive, Dante said, in a tone that made it clear the conversation was over. That is more than most people in my line of work can say after failing me. But he no longer works in this city. Elena did not ask further. She understood the rules of this world well enough, even as an outsider. Loyalty was currency here, and failure had a price that varied depending on how much damage it caused. I don't fail, Elena said again, quieter this time, more to herself than to him. Dante leaned back in his chair, studying her with new interest. Everyone says that before their first real test. Then I suppose we'll find out. A faint, humorless smile crossed his face, gone as quickly as it appeared. We will. The Rossetti estate sat outside the city, surrounded by iron gates and quiet gardens that gave no hint of the violence simmering beneath the family's polished exterior. Elena arrived early the next morning, expecting resistance, and she was not disappointed. Sophia Rossetti was 22, sharp-tongued, and clearly exhausted from years of being watched. She barely looked up from her book when Elena introduced herself in the sitting room. "Let me guess," Sophia said. "Ex-military. Very serious. Doesn't smile much." "Something like that," Elena said. "The last one lasted 3 weeks. He tried to stop me from going to a coffee shop with my friends. I climbed out through the kitchen window. I noticed the window latch is broken," Elena said. "I fixed it this morning." For the first time, Sophia looked directly at her, surprised. Most guards spent their first days trying to win her over, with soft words and promises of freedom they could not keep. Elena had simply done her job, quietly, without asking for permission or forgiveness. "You're different," Sophia said slowly. "I'm not here to be your friend," Elena said. "I'm here to keep you alive. Those don't have to be the same thing, but they don't have to fight each other either." Sophia almost smiled at that, the first real crack in her guarded expression. That first afternoon, Elena also met Margaret Ellis, the estate's longtime housekeeper, a woman in her 60s who had worked for the Rossetti family since before Dante and Sophia's parents had died. Margaret was warm where the rest of the house was cold, offering Elena tea and quiet observations about the family that no file could have contained. "Sophia lost her mother when she was 12, Margaret said, setting a cup down in the kitchen. "Dante was already 20 by then, already stepping into his father's business. He raised her, in his own way, even while he was learning how to survive in this world himself. He does not know how to say he loves her. So he protects her instead. That is his language." Elena filed the information away carefully. Understanding the family's history would help her understand their fears, and fear, more than anything else, was what she needed to anticipate if she wanted to keep Sophia alive. Over the following 2 days, Elena learned the rhythm of the house. She studied the guards' rotation, memorized every entrance and exit, and noted the small details most people overlooked, like the fact that the Eastern Gate camera had a blind spot for exactly 4 seconds every time it rotated. She flagged the issue to the head of security, a broad-shouldered man named Victor Salerno, who seemed both irritated and impressed that a newcomer had spotted something his own team had missed. "You've done this before," Victor said, watching her adjust the camera angle herself rather than waiting for someone else to fix it. "I don't like surprises," Elena said. "Neither does the boss. That's probably why he hired you." Victor walked her through the property in detail that afternoon, pointing out weaknesses that previous guards had ignored. The southern fence line ran too close to a wooded area, giving potential intruders cover within 30 yards of the house. The delivery entrance used the same code for 6 months without being changed. Small things, easily overlooked by anyone not trained to think like the people who wanted to cause harm. "You see all this and you still took the job?" Victor asked, half joking, half genuinely curious. "I've worked places with worse problems," Elena said. "At least here, people take the threat seriously." "They have to," Victor said, his voice losing its humor. "The Calloway family has wanted this territory for 3 years. Dante's father held them back through fear alone. Dante has held them back through smarter means, better alliances, tighter control. But smart only works until someone gets desperate enough to stop caring about consequences." Elena absorbed that information without comment, filing it alongside everything else she had learned. The picture forming in her mind was becoming clearer with each passing hour. A family under constant pressure, holding on to power through careful balance, and a rival family waiting for any sign of weakness to exploit. Dante rarely appeared in the main house during the day, preferring to run his operations from a private office in the East Wing, but Elena noticed him more than once, standing at a window, watching the gardens where Sophia liked to read. He never approached. He never asked questions about how the assignment was going, but Elena could tell, by the way his shoulders eased slightly whenever he saw his sister safe, that this job meant more to him than he would ever say aloud. On the 3rd night, everything changed. Sophia had been invited to a private art gallery opening downtown, a low-risk event according to Victor's assessment, mostly artists and collectors, no known threats in the guest list. Dante approved the trip after reviewing the security plan personally, a detail Elena noted with quiet respect. This was a man who left nothing to chance, not even something as simple as his sister's evening out. The gallery itself was calm, filled with soft lighting and quiet conversation. Elena stayed close to Sophia without hovering, positioning herself where she could see every entrance while still allowing Sophia to enjoy the evening. For nearly 2 hours, nothing seemed out of place. Then Elena noticed a man near the entrance who did not fit. He wore a suit slightly too formal for the crowd, and his eyes moved across the room in sweeping patterns, not admiring the art, but searching for something. Or someone. Elena's instincts, honed over years of combat, told her to move before her mind had even finished processing the threat. "We're leaving," she said quietly to Sophia, taking her arm. "What? Why? The exhibit isn't even—" "Now, Sophia." Something in Elena's voice left no room for argument. Sophia followed without further protest, sensing the sudden shift in the air. They made it to the car just as the first shot rang out, shattering the gallery's front window behind them. Elena shoved Sophia into the back seat and dove after her, shielding her body as the second and third shots hit the car door, missing them both by inches. The driver, a young man named Daniel who had been with the family for less than a year, froze at the wheel, panic locking his hands in place. "Drive!" Elena shouted, and something in her voice snapped him back into motion. The car lurched forward, tires screeching against wet pavement as more shots followed them into the night. Elena kept Sophia pressed low, her own body angled to block any possible line of fire through the rear window. She could feel Sophia's heart pounding beneath her protective arm, could hear her ragged, terrified breathing, and Elena's mind raced through every possible next move, every safe house, every backup plan Victor had outlined during her briefing. "Are you hurt?" Elena asked, scanning Sophia for injury as the car sped through red lights toward the estate. No, I don't think so," Sophia said, her voice shaking. "How did you know? How did you know before it happened?" "I've seen that look before," Elena said. "Men who are hunting, not admiring." By the time they reached the estate gates, Victor and a full security team were already waiting, alerted by Daniel's frantic call during the drive. Dante stood among them, his usual composed expression replaced by something raw and unguarded, something Elena had not yet seen on his face. The moment the car stopped, Dante pulled the door open himself, reaching for his sister before the vehicle had even fully halted. "Sophia," his voice cracked slightly, just once, before he composed himself again. "I'm fine," Sophia said, though her hands were still trembling. "She got me out." She knew before it even started. Dante's eyes shifted to Elena, and for a long moment, he said nothing at all. The silence between them felt heavier than any words could have been. "Inside," he finally said, his voice returning to its usual controlled tone, though something in his gaze lingered on Elena a moment longer than necessary. "Everyone inside, now." Once Sophia was safely in the house, surrounded by Victor's team, Dante pulled Elena aside into a quiet hallway, away from the chaos still unfolding around them. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. "Every detail." Elena recounted the evening with precision, the man near the entrance, the timing of her decision to leave, the shots fired at the car. Dante listened without interrupting, his jaw tight, his hands clenched at his sides. "You saved her life tonight," he said when Elena finished. "I did my job," Elena said. "No," Dante said, his voice suddenly quiet but firm. "4 bodyguards before you failed to notice anything. You noticed a man's eyes across a crowded room. That is not just doing a job, that is something else." Elena held his gaze, unflinching. "Whoever did this will try again. You know that." "I know," Dante said. His expression darkened, something cold and dangerous settling behind his eyes, a glimpse of the man his enemies feared. And when they do, they will regret it. Elena did not respond to that. She had seen enough men make promises of vengeance to know that words meant little in the world Dante Rossetti lived in. What mattered was preparation, vigilance, and the ability to see danger before it arrived. That was the job she had been hired to do, and after tonight, she understood exactly how high the stakes truly were. As she turned to walk back toward Sophia's room, Dante spoke once more, his voice low enough that only she could hear it. Whoever they send next, they will have to go through you first. Elena paused at the doorway, glancing back at him. That was always going to be true, she said. From the very first night. Dante's eyes followed her as she disappeared down the hallway, and for the first time since she had entered his life, something other than suspicion lingered in his expression. It was the beginning of a war neither of them had chosen, but one Elena intended to fight with everything she had, no matter what it would eventually cost her. Elena found Sophia sitting on the edge of her bed, still wrapped in the coat she had worn to the gallery, her hands no longer trembling but her eyes distant, staring at nothing in particular. Elena knocked lightly on the open door before entering. "You don't have to talk about it tonight," Elena said, keeping her voice gentle. "But I'll stay outside your door if that helps you sleep." "Does it get easier?" Sophia asked quietly, "knowing that people want you dead simply because of who you were born to?" Elena considered the question carefully before answering. She had faced her own version of that truth once, years ago, in places far from this house, where the danger came from different enemies but felt no less personal. "No," she said honestly. "It doesn't get easier. You just get better at carrying it. And you stop carrying it alone." Sophia looked up at her, something shifting in her expression, gratitude mixed with the exhaustion of a girl who had just learned, in the most brutal way possible, that her life could end in an instant. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight, for not asking questions, for just knowing." "That's the job," Elena said, though even as she spoke the words, she knew this had already become more than a job. Something about the way Sophia's hand still shook slightly. Something about the raw fear in Dante's eyes when he had pulled the car door open had settled deep into Elena's chest, a responsibility that went beyond a paycheck. Elena took her post outside Sophia's door for the remainder of the night, listening to the quiet sounds of the estate settling around her, the distant murmur of Victor's team coordinating patrols, the occasional creak of old floorboards as staff moved cautiously through darkened hallways. Sleep would not come easily to anyone in this house tonight. Near midnight, Dante appeared at the end of the hallway, still dressed in the same clothes from earlier, his tie long since discarded, his sleeves rolled up as though he had spent the past hours doing something with his hands rather than sitting idle with his thoughts. He walked toward Elena without a word, stopping a few feet away, his eyes flicking briefly toward Sophia's closed door. "She's asleep," Elena said quietly. "Finally." "Good," Dante said. He hesitated, an unusual break in his usual composure. "I owe you something more than payment for tonight." "You don't owe me anything," Elena said. "This is what you hired me to do." "I hired you to watch her," Dante said. "I did not expect you to see the threat before it happened." Most men in my employ would not have noticed that stranger's eyes across a crowded room. You did, and because of that, my sister is alive tonight instead of in a hospital bed, or worse. Elena held his gaze steadily. "The men who did this will try again. You already know that." "I do," Dante said, his voice hardening, "and I intend to find out exactly who sent them and why they believed they could reach my sister and walk away without consequence." "I can help with that," Elena said, "but only if you let me do my job without interference. I need full access to the security logs, the guest list from tonight, everything Victor has on file about recent threats." Dante studied her for a long moment, weighing something behind his dark eyes. Then he nodded once, a small but significant gesture of trust from a man who trusted almost no one. "You will have it by morning." "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," Dante said, turning to leave. Whoever ordered tonight's attack will not stop simply because it failed. If anything, failure will make them more desperate, and desperate men are the most dangerous kind. He disappeared down the hallway, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts once more. Outside, the rain continued to fall over the estate, washing away the evidence of the night's violence, but doing nothing to erase the tension that had settled permanently into the air. Somewhere in the city, the men who had opened fire on that car were already planning their next move, and Elena knew, with absolute certainty, that this had only been the beginning of a war that would test every skill she had ever learned, and demand a loyalty she had never expected to feel for a family that was not her own. Morning brought no comfort to the Rossetti estate, only the cold clarity of a family preparing for war. Elena arrived at Victor Salerno's office before sunrise, exactly as Dante had promised, a thick folder of security logs and guest lists already waiting on the desk. She worked through the documents methodically, cross-referencing names from the gallery's guest registry against known associates of the Calloway family, searching for any thread that might lead her closer to the man who had opened fire on Sophia's car. "You didn't sleep," Victor said, entering the office with 2 cups of coffee, setting one down beside her without being asked. "Neither did you," Elena said, glancing at the dark circles under his eyes. "Nobody in this house slept," Victor said. "Boss included. I heard him pacing his office half the night." Elena did not respond, but she filed the information away, another small piece in the puzzle of a man who wore control like armor, but felt everything underneath it far more deeply than he allowed anyone to see. By mid-morning, Elena had narrowed the guest list down to 3 names that raised concern. Individuals with loose connections to businesses previously linked to the Calloway operation. She brought her findings to Victor, who reviewed them with growing tension in his expression. "This one," Victor said, tapping a name near the bottom of the list. "Nathan Pierce. He's a low-level buyer, moves through galleries and auction houses. We've suspected him of laundering money for the Calloways before, but nothing solid enough to act on." "He fits the description of the man I saw near the entrance," Elena said. "Same build, same suit. I'd bet money he was there to confirm Sophia's location before the shooters moved into position." "A scout," Victor said grimly. "That means this wasn't random. Someone knew exactly where she would be, and when." The implications settled heavily over both of them. Someone inside the family's circle, or close enough to it, had leaked Sophia's schedule to outsiders. Elena had suspected as much since the attack, but hearing Victor confirm it made the threat feel immediate, in a way that statistics and guest lists could not. "How many people knew about the gallery trip in advance?" Elena asked. Victor exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "Too many. Sophia mentioned it to friends. The driver knew the route. Even the kitchen staff overheard her talking about it at breakfast. This house isn't built for secrets. Not really. It's built for loyalty, and loyalty only holds as long as nobody offers a better price. Then we need to change how information moves through this house," Elena said, "starting with schedules. Nobody outside essential personnel should know Sophia's movements more than an hour before they happen." Victor nodded slowly, considering the suggestion. "That's going to ruffle feathers. Some of the staff have worked here for 15 years. They'll see it as a lack of trust." "Better ruffled feathers than another car full of bullet holes," Elena said. Victor allowed a small, humorless laugh. "Can't argue with that." They brought their findings to Dante that afternoon. He listened without interruption, his expression darkening steadily as Victor laid out the theory of an informant within their ranks. "Find out who had access to Sophia's schedule," Dante said, his voice flat and dangerous in its calm. "Everyone. Staff, drivers, anyone who knew about the gallery opening before it happened." "That's a long list," Victor said carefully. "Then we start narrowing it," Dante said. "Today." Elena watched the exchange with quiet interest, noting how Dante's authority filled the room without raised voices or dramatic gestures. He did not need to shout to command obedience. His men respected him, feared him in the way that came from genuine loyalty rather than blind terror, and Elena found herself understanding, more with each passing day, why this family had survived as long as it had in a world built on betrayal. Margaret Ellis approached Elena in the kitchen later that evening, her expression troubled in a way that immediately caught Elena's attention. "I don't like gossip," Margaret said quietly, glancing toward the hallway to ensure they were alone. "But there's a maid, Louisa, who started only 4 months ago. She's been asking odd questions. Where Sophia sleeps, what time she wakes, whether the family keeps a set schedule for visits to the city. I thought little of it at first. New staff ask questions, but after last night, I keep thinking about it." Elena absorbed the information carefully. "Does Victor know?" "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first. You seem like someone who handles things carefully, without causing unnecessary panic." "Thank you for telling me," Elena said. "I'll look into it quietly." Elena spent the following day observing Louisa without drawing attention to her scrutiny, watching the young woman's patterns during her shifts, noting who she spoke with and how often she left the main house during her breaks. By evening, Elena had confirmed enough irregularities to bring the matter to Victor directly, and within hours, a quiet but thorough investigation revealed that Louisa had indeed been passing small pieces of information to a contact outside the estate, though she claimed under questioning that she had believed the payments were simply for harmless gossip, not realizing the danger her information might create. Whether her claims of ignorance were true or not, the discovery confirmed what Elena had suspected from the beginning. The Calloway family's reach extended further into the estate than anyone had wanted to believe, and the informant network would need to be dismantled carefully, without alerting whoever remained undiscovered within the household. Sophia, meanwhile, remained largely confined to the estate for the following days, a decision she resented openly but did not fight as fiercely as Elena expected. The gallery attack had shaken something loose in her, a recognition that the danger surrounding her family was not an abstract concept from stories her brother told to explain his frequent absences. It was real, immediate, and nearly fatal. "I used to think he was exaggerating," Sophia admitted one afternoon, sitting with Elena in the estate's garden while 2 guards patrolled the perimeter at a respectful distance. The security, the guards, the constant caution. I thought it was overprotective. Now I understand he was trying to prepare me for something he knew, deep down, would eventually happen. "He loves you," Elena said simply. "Everything he does comes from that, even when it looks like control instead of care." Sophia studied her for a long moment. "You've only known him a few days. How do you already understand him better than most people who've known him for years?" Elena considered the question honestly. "I've spent my life reading people quickly. It's a skill you develop when hesitation gets people hurt. Your brother isn't as unreadable as he thinks he is. He just doesn't expect anyone to bother looking closely enough to notice." Sophia smiled faintly at that, the first genuine smile Elena had seen from her since the attack. "Maybe you should tell him that sometime." "Maybe I will," Elena said, though she doubted the opportunity would present itself easily. Dante Rossetti was not a man who invited personal conversation, and Elena had no illusions about the professional boundaries she needed to maintain, regardless of the respect quietly growing between them. That respect was tested only 2 days later, when Elena intercepted a second attempt at infiltration, this time far closer to home than anyone had anticipated. Late in the evening, while reviewing security footage in Victor's office, Elena noticed a delivery truck idling near the estate's rear gate, longer than any legitimate delivery should require. The driver, dressed in a uniform matching a local produce company, made no move to unload his vehicle, instead remaining seated, watching the gate with unusual focus. "That's not right," Elena said, already moving toward the door. Victor followed her gaze to the monitor. "Could be nothing. Deliveries run late sometimes." "Deliveries don't sit idling for 20 minutes without approaching the gate," Elena said. "Pull up his manifest." Victor's fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, cross-referencing the delivery company's records against their approved vendor list. The result came back within seconds, No scheduled delivery existed for that address that evening. "Lock down the gate," Elena said. "Now." Victor radioed the command immediately, and within moments, the estate's perimeter guards moved into position, approaching the truck with weapons drawn but concealed, maintaining a careful appearance of routine questioning rather than open confrontation. Elena watched the exchange on the monitor, her hand instinctively moving toward the weapon she kept holstered beneath her jacket. The driver, realizing he had been discovered, attempted to reverse the truck rapidly, tires screeching against the gravel road, but Victor's men had already blocked the exit with a second vehicle. Within minutes, the driver was in custody, his truck searched thoroughly under Victor's direct supervision. What they found inside confirmed every fear Elena had carried since the gallery attack. Hidden beneath a false floor panel in the truck's cargo hold were surveillance photographs of the estate's perimeter, detailed notes on guard rotation schedules, and a hand-drawn map marking Sophia's bedroom window with unsettling precision. Dante arrived at the gate within minutes of being notified, his expression unreadable as he examined the evidence Victor presented to him. Elena watched him carefully, searching for any crack in his composure, but found only cold, calculated fury simmering just beneath the surface. "Who sent you?" Dante asked the driver directly, his voice low and controlled in a way that somehow felt more threatening than shouting would have. The driver, a nervous man clearly unaccustomed to violence despite his role in the operation, refused to speak at first, glancing anxiously between Dante and the armed men surrounding him. It was Elena who finally broke the silence, stepping forward with the calm authority she had developed over years of high-pressure negotiations in far more dangerous circumstances than this one. "You're not equipped for this kind of work," Elena said to the driver, studying his trembling hands and inexperienced posture. "Someone paid you cash to sit outside this gate and take pictures. You didn't sign up to be caught, and you definitely didn't sign up to protect whoever hired you with your silence." The driver's eyes flicked toward her, something like relief crossing his features at the suggestion of an easier path forward. "A man," he said finally, his voice shaking. "I don't know his real name. He goes by Callahan. Pays well, asks questions about security schedules, doesn't explain why he needs the information." "Callahan," Victor repeated, exchanging a glance with Dante. "That's one of Calloway's known associates." Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The only outward sign of the anger Elena suspected was burning far more intensely beneath his controlled exterior. "Take him to the back room," Dante said quietly to two of his men. "I want everything he knows." As the driver was led away, Dante turned to Elena, something unreadable passing behind his dark eyes. "You handled that better than most of my own men would have." "People respond to calm more than they respond to threats," Elena said. "Fear makes people protective of the person paying them. Understanding makes them realize they were never protected to begin with." Dante studied her for a long moment, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly, though the anger in his eyes remained sharp and present. "You continue to surprise me, Elena Marchetti." "I'd rather surprise you than disappoint you," Elena said. A faint, almost imperceptible smile crossed his face before he turned away, walking back toward the main house with the weight of new information settling over his plans for the days ahead. Elena watched him go, aware that the walls between them, professional and otherwise, were shifting in ways neither of them had anticipated when this assignment began. That night, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion pulling at her body, Elena found herself standing in the estate's east hallway, staring out over the darkened gardens where Sophia liked to read during quieter afternoons. She heard footsteps behind her before she saw him, recognizing the measured, deliberate pace that belonged only to Dante. "You should be resting," he said, stopping beside her at the window. "So should you," Elena replied. "Yet here we both are." Dante allowed a small, tired exhale, something close to a laugh, but not quite reaching that lightness. "My mother used to stand in this exact spot," he said quietly, surprising Elena with the sudden personal admission. She said the gardens reminded her of home, before she married my father, and everything about her life became about protecting territory instead of tending flowers. What happened to her? Elena asked gently. She was killed, Dante said, his voice flat, controlled, though Elena could sense the years of buried grief beneath the simple statement. 12 years ago, a rival family, back when my father still ran things his way, through fear and unnecessary violence. I was 20. Sophia was only 12. I promised myself that day I would never let anything happen to her, no matter what it cost me. Elena remained silent, understanding instinctively that this was not a moment that required words, only presence. Dante had spent years building walls around himself, and this small offering of his past felt like something rare and unguarded, a glimpse of the man beneath the calculated authority he wore like a second skin. You couldn't have stopped what happened to your mother, Elena finally said. You were young. This world doesn't wait for anyone to be ready. I know that, Dante said. Logically, I know that. But knowing something and feeling it are very different things. I understand that better than you might think, Elena said quietly. Memories of her own past surfacing unbidden. Faces of people she had not been able to save despite every skill and instinct she possessed. Dante turned to look at her fully for the first time since the conversation began, something searching in his expression, as though he were seeing her clearly for the first time, not as an employee or a skilled bodyguard, but as a person who carried her own weight of loss and responsibility. Whoever you lost, he said carefully, I imagine it shaped you the same way my mother's death shaped me. Elena met his gaze steadily. It did. Neither of them spoke further about it, the moment settling into a comfortable silence that neither felt compelled to fill with unnecessary words. Outside, the gardens remained still and quiet under the night sky, but both of them understood that the calm surrounding the estate was temporary, a brief pause before the next escalation in a war that had already claimed too much from both of their families. In the days that followed, preparations for Sophia's birthday celebration continued despite the mounting tension across the estate. Sophia had insisted on keeping the small gathering, a modest event with close friends and select family associates, arguing that hiding away entirely would only prove to the Callaways that their tactics of fear were working. I refuse to let them take this from me too, Sophia told her brother during a tense conversation. Elena overheard from the hallway outside Dante's office. I already lost my freedom to walk through a gallery without fear. I won't lose my birthday as well. Dante's response was measured, though Elena could hear the reluctance in his voice. If we do this, security will be tighter than anything you have ever experienced. No exceptions, no complaints. I wouldn't expect anything less, Sophia said. Elena, once informed of the decision, immediately began coordinating with Victor on an entirely new security plan, one that accounted for every lesson learned from the gallery attack and the attempted infiltration at the gate. They mapped every entry point of the estate's ballroom, arranged additional guards along the perimeter, and implemented a strict guest verification process that required confirmation from at least 2 trusted sources before anyone was permitted through the gates. Still, despite every precaution, Elena felt an unease she could not fully explain in the days leading up to the celebration. An instinct sharpened by years of experience that told her something larger was still being planned, something the Callaway family had not yet revealed. She shared her concerns with Dante the night before the party, standing once again in the east hallway where their most honest conversations seemed to occur. I can't point to anything specific, Elena admitted. But this feels too quiet, 2 failed attempts, and now silence. That's not how desperate men usually behave. Maybe they're regrouping, Dante said. Maybe they realize we've tightened security beyond what they can easily breach. Or maybe they're waiting for the one night we'll have the most people, the most exposure, the most chaos to hide within, Elena said. Dante's expression darkened as her words settled over him, the same fear clearly crossing his mind. Cancel the party. Sophia will fight you on that, Elena said. And honestly, canceling now might only delay the inevitable. If they're determined, they'll find another opportunity eventually. Better we control the environment as much as possible, rather than let them choose the next moment on their own terms. Dante studied her carefully, weighing the risk in silence for a long moment. You really believe we can protect her at that party? I believe I will not let anything happen to her, Elena said, her voice steady with a conviction that left no room for doubt. But I need you to trust every decision I make tomorrow night, without hesitation, without question. Dante held her gaze, something unspoken passing between them, a recognition of trust neither had expected to develop so quickly under such violent circumstances. You have it, he said finally. 2 days later, that fragile pause would end entirely, when Sophia's birthday celebration became the target of an attack far more devastating than anything the Calloway family had attempted before. The ballroom glittered with warm light, laughter, and the fragile illusion of normal life. Sophia moved through the crowd in a deep blue dress, smiling more freely than Elena had seen since the night of the gallery attack, surrounded by friends who had no idea how carefully every corner of the room had been secured before a single guest arrived. Elena stayed close, positioned near the eastern wall where she could observe both the main entrance and the terrace doors leading to the gardens, her senses alert despite the celebratory atmosphere surrounding her. Victor's men were stationed throughout the property, some visible in formal attire blending among the guests, others hidden along the perimeter, watching for any sign of the threat Elena had warned Dante about the night before. Every guest had been verified twice before entry. Every vendor delivering food and flowers had been searched thoroughly. Nothing had been left to chance. Margaret circulated among the staff, overseeing the caterers with practiced efficiency, though Elena noticed her pause more than once near the windows, glancing outward as though she too sensed something was not quite right about the stillness of the night beyond the glass. Even Daniel, the young driver who had frozen during the first attack, stood near the main entrance with newfound purpose, having volunteered to assist Victor's team after the gallery shooting had shaken something loose in him, a determination to prove himself capable when it mattered most. Sophia's friends, unaware of the tension humming beneath the surface of the celebration, danced and laughed freely, filling the ballroom with the kind of carefree joy that Elena found herself both grateful for and deeply unsettled by. It was exactly the atmosphere Dante had wanted for his sister. One final night of normal life before the family's response to the ongoing threat inevitably escalated further. But normal life, Elena knew from painful experience, often collapsed without warning, and the very innocence filling the room made her all the more vigilant. And yet, as the evening stretched into its second hour, Elena's unease refused to fade. Dante remained near the room's edge for most of the celebration, engaged in quiet conversation with a handful of trusted associates, though his eyes returned to Sophia and Elena more frequently than his composed expression let on. Twice, Elena caught him watching her rather than his sister, and both times he looked away quickly, as though caught doing something he had not intended anyone to notice. At 9 in the evening, Sophia's closest friends gathered around the cake, laughter and warmth filling the room as candles were lit and old stories were shared. Elena remained near the terrace doors, scanning the gardens beyond the glass, when she noticed movement at the edge of the tree line that did not belong to any of Victor's stationed guards. Her instincts screamed before her mind fully processed the threat. "Victor," Elena said into the small radio clipped beneath her jacket, her voice low and urgent. "Movement in the eastern garden. Unauthorized." Victor's voice crackled back through the radio, tight with sudden alarm. "Copy that. Moving units to your position. All teams, converge on the eastern garden. We may have." His words were cut short by a sound that silenced the entire ballroom for a fraction of a second. The unmistakable crack of gunfire from somewhere beyond the terrace, followed immediately by shouting among the guards stationed outside. The response came half a second too late. The terrace doors exploded inward, in a shower of glass, as the first wave of gunmen breached the perimeter, moving with military precision that spoke of careful planning rather than desperate improvisation. Screams erupted across the ballroom as guests scattered in every direction, chaos swallowing the celebration whole within seconds. Elena moved instantly, cutting through the panicking crowd toward Sofia, who stood frozen near the cake table, her eyes wide with terror as gunfire echoed through the room. Elena reached her within moments, pulling her down behind an overturned table as bullets tore through the space where Sofia had been standing only seconds before. "Stay down!" Elena shouted over the chaos, positioning her body between Sofia and the exposed terrace doors. "Stay with me!" Across the room, Dante's men engaged the intruders in a desperate exchange of gunfire, Victor's voice cutting through the radio with urgent commands as he attempted to coordinate a defense against an attack that had clearly been planned with far more resources than anyone had anticipated. Elena caught glimpses of Dante moving through the chaos, no longer the composed businessman from earlier in the evening, but a man fighting with brutal efficiency to reach his sister. Dante had discarded his jacket somewhere in the confusion, his white shirt already stained with dust and debris as he moved from cover to cover, exchanging fire with two gunmen who had breached the eastern hallway. Years of training beneath his father's harsh tutelage surfaced instantly, every instinct honed for exactly this kind of moment, though nothing had prepared him for the particular terror of not knowing whether his sister was still alive somewhere within the chaos surrounding him. "Sofia!" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the gunfire and screaming guests fleeing toward every available exit. "Sofia, where are you?" He caught sight of Elena's dark hair near the overturned tables and pushed harder through the crowd, cutting down one more attacker who emerged from behind a shattered pillar before finally breaking into open sightline just as the gunman near the terrace raised his weapon toward the two women. Everything after that happened too quickly for thought, only instinct, only the desperate need to reach them before it was too late. "This way," Elena said, pulling Sofia toward a service corridor near the kitchen, a route she had memorized during her earliest days at the estate, specifically for situations like this one. Sofia stumbled after her, her breath ragged with panic, glass and debris crunching beneath their feet as they moved. They nearly made it to the corridor when a second wave of gunmen emerged from the kitchen entrance, cutting off their only clear escape route. Elena froze for half a second, calculating options that had suddenly narrowed to almost nothing, before pulling Sofia sharply to the left, back toward the open ballroom floor, away from the new threat. It was the wrong direction, and the right one, all at once. As they emerged back into the chaos of the main room, one of the gunmen near the terrace spotted them, raising his weapon with cold, practiced intent, aiming directly at Sofia's exposed position. Elena did not think. She moved. She threw herself fully in front of Sofia, her body absorbing the impact of the first bullet as it tore through her shoulder, a burst of white-hot pain exploding through her senses. She stumbled, but did not fall, refusing to let her body collapse, even as shock threatened to overwhelm her, keeping herself angled directly between Sofia and the gunman's line of fire. The second bullet struck her side moments later, and Elena felt her legs weaken beneath her, the world narrowing to a tunnel of pain and adrenaline as she forced herself to remain upright, one arm still wrapped protectively around Sofia's trembling frame. "Elena!" Sofia's voice broke into a scream, filled with horror as she realized what was happening, what Elena was doing. The third bullet struck Elena's lower abdomen, just as Dante appeared through the chaos, his weapon raised, firing with lethal precision toward the gunman who had targeted his sister. The attacker fell instantly, but the damage had already been done. Elena's knees finally buckled, her body no longer able to sustain the sheer force of will that had kept her standing through 3 separate impacts. She collapsed to the ballroom floor, still shielding Sofia with the last of her strength, her vision beginning to blur at the edges as blood soaked rapidly through her dress, spreading across the polished floor beneath her. "No, no," Stay with me! Stay with me! Sophia sobbed, kneeling beside her, pressing frantic hands against the worst of the wounds, though the effort felt hopelessly inadequate against the severity of what had happened. Dante reached them seconds later, his expression transforming instantly from controlled fury to something Elena had never seen cross his face before, raw, unfiltered terror. He dropped to his knees beside Elena, his hands joining Sophia's in a desperate attempt to slow the bleeding, his usual composure completely shattered. "Elena," he said, his voice cracking in a way that betrayed every carefully constructed wall he had built around himself over the years. "Elena, look at me. Stay awake. You need to stay awake." Elena's vision swam, the sounds of the room fading into a muffled distance despite the chaos still unfolding around them. Security teams finally clearing the remaining threats, guests screaming and fleeing toward the exits, sirens beginning to wail in the distance as emergency services approached the estate. "Sophia," Elena managed to whisper, her voice barely audible over the noise surrounding them. "Is she—" "She's fine. She's fine because of you," Dante said, his hands pressing firmly against her wounds, his eyes glistening with an emotion he had clearly never intended anyone to witness. "You saved her. Do you understand me? You saved her life. Now you need to fight for your own." Elena tried to respond, but darkness pulled at the edges of her consciousness with increasing insistence, her body finally beginning to surrender to the trauma it had endured. The last thing she registered clearly was Dante's voice, raw and desperate, calling her name over and over, as though the sheer force of his words alone could keep her tethered to consciousness. "Stay with me," he said, his voice breaking completely now, all pretense of control abandoned entirely. "Please, Elena, stay with me." The paramedics arrived within minutes, though to those waiting beside Elena, it felt like an eternity had passed. Dante refused to release his grip on her hand, even as the medical team worked to stabilize her, barking orders at his own men to clear a path, to move faster, to do whatever was necessary to get her to the hospital in time. Victor appeared at his side, his own face pale with shock and exertion from the firefight that had finally ended, the remaining attackers either killed or fled into the night. "Boss, we need to secure the estate. There could be more of them." "I don't care about the estate," Dante said, his voice sharp with an intensity Victor had rarely witnessed from him. "Get every available man on this hospital. I want the building locked down the moment she arrives. Nobody gets near her room without my direct authorization." "Understood," Victor said, recognizing immediately that arguing would accomplish nothing against the storm of emotion barely contained beneath his boss's commands. Margaret arrived at Sophia's side moments later, wrapping a trembling arm around the young woman's shoulders, guiding her gently away from the worst of the wreckage, while still keeping watch on the stretcher being carried toward the waiting ambulance. "Come away now, child," Margaret said softly, though her own voice shook with the effort of remaining steady. "There's nothing more you can do here. Let them work." "I can't leave her," Sophia said, resisting weakly, even as exhaustion and shock began to overtake her trembling body. "She wouldn't have left me." "And she wouldn't want you standing in danger a moment longer than necessary," Margaret said firmly, though her eyes remained fixed on the ambulance doors closing around Elena's motionless form. "Your brother needs you safe. That is the only thing that will let him think clearly enough to help her now." Reluctantly, Sophia allowed herself to be guided toward the house, glancing back one final time as the ambulance's sirens cut through the night, carrying away the woman who had thrown herself into the path of 3 bullets without a moment's hesitation. As the paramedics lifted Elena onto a stretcher, her eyes fluttered briefly, catching one final glimpse of Dante's face hovering above her, stripped of every mask he had ever worn in her presence, revealing something raw and unguarded that neither of them had been prepared to acknowledge until this moment of crisis forced it into the open. "Don't you dare," Dante whispered, his hand tightening around hers as they wheeled her toward the ambulance waiting outside. "Don't you dare leave before I have the chance to properly thank you." Elena's world faded to black as the ambulance doors closed, the last sound she registered being Dante's voice, still speaking to her, still refusing to let go, even as the vehicle pulled away into the night, sirens cutting through the darkness toward the nearest hospital. Behind them, the estate's ballroom lay in ruins, glass and debris scattered across the floor, where a celebration had turned into a battlefield within the span of a few violent minutes. Sophia stood in the wreckage, shaking, staring at the blood staining the polished floor where Elena had collapsed, protecting her, understanding with sudden, devastating clarity just how close she had come to losing her life, and how much the woman who had saved her had been willing to sacrifice to prevent that outcome. Victor moved quickly through the chaos, coordinating the cleanup and securing the perimeter against any remaining threat, his mind already racing forward to the retaliation he knew Dante would demand once Elena's condition stabilized, if it stabilized at all. The Calloway family had crossed a line tonight that would not go unanswered, and Victor understood, with grim certainty, that the coming days would bring a level of violence the city had not witnessed in years. For now, though, all that mattered was the fragile thread of life fighting to hold on inside an ambulance, racing through darkened streets, carrying with it not just Elena Marchetti's survival, but the fragile, unexpected connection that had grown between her and a man who had never allowed himself to need anyone, until the night she nearly died protecting the only family he had left. Inside the ambulance, the paramedics worked with practiced urgency, calling out vital signs to one another as the vehicle raced through red lights, sirens splitting the night air. One of them, a steady-handed woman named Grace, pressed firm bandages against Elena's wounds while monitoring the faint, irregular rhythm of her pulse. "She's losing too much blood," Grace said to her partner, her voice tight with concentration. "We need to move faster." "Almost there," the driver called back. 2 minutes out." Grace glanced down at Elena's pale face, noting the faint movement of her lips, words too quiet to fully hear over the sirens. Leaning closer, she caught fragments of what Elena was trying to say, something about Sophia, something about staying safe. Even now, even here, still thinking of someone other than herself. "She's safe," Grace said gently, though she doubted Elena could truly hear her. "You kept her safe. Now let us take care of you." The hospital doors burst open moments later as the ambulance arrived, a full trauma team already assembled and waiting, alerted in advance by Victor's frantic call, ensuring no delay would cost precious seconds. Elena was rushed directly into emergency surgery, the doors closing behind the surgical team as Dante arrived only minutes later, having driven himself through the city with a recklessness that would have alarmed anyone accustomed to his usual careful control. He burst through the hospital entrance, Victor close behind him, and demanded information from the first member of staff he encountered, his voice carrying an authority that left no room for hesitation or bureaucratic delay. "The woman who was just brought in, Elena Marchetti, where is she?" "Sir, she's in surgery right now. I can't give you further details until—" "I don't care what you can and cannot do," Dante said, his composure fracturing dangerously. "I want to know the moment there is news. Any news. I don't care what time it is." The staff member, recognizing the desperation in his voice as something beyond simple impatience, nodded quickly and promised to relay information as soon as it became available. Dante turned away, pacing the length of the waiting room with restless, barely contained energy, Victor watching him with quiet concern, having never witnessed his boss so thoroughly unraveled by anything in all the years they had worked together. "She'll pull through," Victor said, though the words felt inadequate against the weight of uncertainty hanging over the sterile waiting room. "She's strong. You've seen what she's capable of." "Strength doesn't stop bullets, Victor," Dante said quietly, sinking into a chair, his head in his hands for the first time since anyone could remember seeing him show such open vulnerability. "It just makes people foolish enough to stand in front of them." The words hung heavy in the air, an acknowledgement of guilt Dante had never intended to voice aloud, the recognition that Elena's willingness to sacrifice herself for his sister had, in some small way, been shaped by the very world he had built around his family, a world where loyalty sometimes demanded impossible costs from the people who cared most. Victor sat down beside him, choosing his next words carefully. You didn't put that bullet in her. The men who did are already dead, or running scared. This isn't on you. Isn't it? Dante said, lifting his head to meet Victor's gaze. She came into this house 11 days ago, as a stranger hired to do a job. 11 days, and she nearly died for a family that isn't even hers. Maybe it stopped being just a job somewhere along the way, Victor said quietly. For both of you. Dante did not answer, but the truth of Victor's observation settled over him heavily, undeniable even in the depths of his fear and exhaustion. He thought of the conversation in the east hallway only nights before, of her steady voice cutting through his carefully guarded grief about his mother, of the quiet trust that had grown between them faster than he had ever allowed with anyone since childhood. He thought of her collapsing on the ballroom floor, still shielding Sophia even as her own strength failed her completely. Hours passed in that sterile waiting room, the city's night deepening outside the windows, while surgeons worked to save a woman who had asked for nothing in return for risking everything. Sophia arrived shortly after midnight, escorted by 2 guards despite her insistence that she needed no protection within the hospital walls, her eyes red from crying, her hands still trembling faintly as she sat beside her brother in silence. She's going to be angry when she wakes up and finds out I left the estate again, Sophia said quietly, attempting a weak, watery smile that did not fully reach her eyes. She'll forgive you, Dante said, managing a faint echo of the same attempt at levity, though his voice remained hollow with worry. She seems to have an endless capacity for that, apparently, even toward people who nearly get her killed with their birthday parties. Sophia leaned her head against her brother's shoulder, and for a long while, neither of them spoke again, simply waiting together in the quiet, uncertain hours before dawn, praying that the woman fighting for her life beyond those surgical doors would still be there to see the sunrise. The surgeon emerged just after 4 in the morning, his scrubs stained and his expression carefully neutral in the way medical professionals learn to control before delivering news that could shatter a family in an instant. Dante rose immediately, Sophia at his side, Victor standing close behind them both. "Tell me," Dante said, his voice tight with a fear he no longer bothered concealing. "She made it through surgery," the surgeon said, and the collective breath released in that waiting room felt almost audible. It was close. The 3rd bullet came dangerously near her spine, and she lost a significant amount of blood before reaching us. But she's stable now. The next 48 hours will tell us more about her recovery, but she's a fighter. Whatever kept her holding on through 3 gunshot wounds, it's still working in her favor. "Can we see her?" Sophia asked immediately. "She's unconscious, and will likely remain that way for several hours, as her body recovers from the trauma," the surgeon said. "But yes, you may sit with her, briefly, once she's settled into recovery." Dante did not wait for further explanation. He followed the surgeon down the hallway with a determination that left no room for anyone to suggest otherwise, Sophia close behind him, both of them finally allowed into the small recovery room where Elena lay connected to a quiet symphony of machines, monitoring every fragile sign of life within her. She looked smaller somehow, stripped of the fierce competence that had defined every moment Dante had known her, her face pale against the white pillow, bandages visible beneath the hospital gown covering the wounds that had nearly taken her life. Dante pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down without hesitation, taking her hand gently in his own, careful of the intravenous line taped along her wrist. "I told you not to leave before I could thank you," he said quietly, his voice raw with exhaustion and lingering fear. "You're going to have to wake up eventually, if only to hear it." Victor lingered near the doorway, giving the family a measure of privacy while still remaining close enough to relay any updates to the security team stationed outside. He had known Dante for over a decade, had watched him navigate the aftermath of his mother's murder, the transition of power following his father's eventual retirement to a quiet estate outside the city, countless negotiations and conflicts that would have broken lesser men. Never once, in all that time, had Victor witnessed this particular kind of unguarded fear on his boss's face. "I'll update the perimeter teams," Victor said quietly, stepping back into the hallway to give the siblings space, though his own thoughts lingered on the woman in that bed, on the debt the entire family now owed her, a debt he intended to help repay in whatever way circumstances allowed. Sophia stood at the foot of the bed, watching her brother with an expression of quiet astonishment. In all her years, she had never once seen him display this kind of open vulnerability, not even in the aftermath of their mother's death, when he had retreated so thoroughly into controlled composure that she sometimes wondered if he had ever truly allowed himself to grieve at all. "You really care about her," Sophia said softly, more observation than question. Dante did not look away from Elena's still form as he answered. "She took 3 bullets meant for you without a moment's hesitation, Sophia. How could I not care about someone capable of that kind of sacrifice?" "That's not what I meant," Sophia said gently. "I mean you, specifically. Not just gratitude for what she did, something more than that." Dante remained silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle, absent circles over Elena's knuckles. "I don't know what to call it," he finally admitted. "I've spent years building walls around myself, convincing everyone, including myself, that I didn't need anyone beyond what this family requires for survival. And then she walked into my office 11 days ago, completely unimpressed by everything I thought would intimidate her, and something about her steadiness made me feel like maybe I didn't have to carry everything entirely alone." Sophia reached out and squeezed her brother's shoulder gently, a rare moment of tenderness between siblings who had spent years navigating grief and danger together, with careful emotional distance. "Then don't let those walls come back up once she wakes. Whatever this is, don't waste it out of fear." Later that morning, once Sophia had reluctantly agreed to return home under Victor's escort to rest, Dante remained alone beside Elena's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her breathing, the quiet beeping of the monitors offering the only reassurance that she remained, however precariously, among the living. A nurse entered periodically to check her vitals, offering brief, professional updates that Dante absorbed with the same intense focus he applied to matters of far greater apparent consequence in his business dealings. "She's a strong woman," the nurse remarked at one point, adjusting the intravenous line with practiced efficiency. "Whatever kept her fighting through that surgery, it's rare to see that kind of will in someone so severely injured. She's the strongest person I've ever met," Dante said quietly, and meant every word of it. Over the following days, Elena's condition improved steadily, though the road to recovery remained slow and difficult. She drifted in and out of consciousness during the first 48 hours, occasionally murmuring fragments of sentences that made little sense to those keeping vigil beside her bed. Dante barely left the hospital during that time, delegating operational decisions to Victor while he remained close to Elena's side, ignoring the concerned suggestions from his own advisors that his continued presence there, rather than attending to urgent business matters, sent an unusual and potentially dangerous message throughout the organization. Word of his behavior spread quickly among his men, whispered conversations carrying through the ranks about the boss who had abandoned his usual iron discipline to sit beside a bodyguard's hospital bed for days on end. Some viewed it with confusion, uncertain what to make of this uncharacteristic devotion from a man known throughout the city for his controlled, calculating nature. Others, particularly those who had witnessed Elena's fierce protection of Sophia during the attack, understood immediately, recognizing in Dante's vigil a debt of gratitude too significant to ignore, regardless of how it appeared to outsiders. Victor found himself fielding questions from concerned associates who worried that Dante's distraction left the family vulnerable during a critical period of retaliation planning against the Callaways. He handled each conversation carefully, defending his boss's decision without revealing more than necessary about the personal significance behind it. "The boss knows exactly what he's doing," Victor told one particularly persistent associate during a tense phone call. "Trust me, nothing about our response to the Callaways has slowed down. He's simply choosing to honor the woman who saved his sister's life before turning his full attention back to business. That's not weakness. That's the kind of loyalty this family has always valued, even if it looks different than what people expect. Despite the reassurances, Elena's continued unconscious state weighed heavily on everyone connected to the estate. Sophia visited daily after her classes, bringing small gifts, flowers, books. Elena had never expressed interest in reading, but which Sophia hoped might somehow reach her anyway. Margaret sent carefully prepared broths and soups through Daniel, who had appointed himself an unofficial courier between the estate and hospital, driven by his own gratitude toward the woman whose sharp instincts had likely saved his life during that first attack outside the gallery. Nathan Pierce, the man Elena had identified as the scout responsible for confirming Sophia's location on the night of the gallery attack, was found 2 days after the birthday party, having fled the city in a panic once news of the failed assault reached him. Victor's men located him in a motel room 3 hours north, and what he revealed under careful questioning confirmed everything the family had feared. The Calloway family had spent months planning the attack, coordinating with several outside contractors to breach the estate's security during the one event guaranteed to draw Sophia into a vulnerable, semi-public setting. The informant network within the household had been more extensive than initially suspected, involving not only the maid Louisa, but also a delivery contractor who had provided detailed floor plans of the ballroom months in advance. Dante received this information via a brief call from Victor while sitting beside Elena's hospital bed, his expression darkening with cold, controlled fury as each new detail confirmed the depth of betrayal and planning behind the attack that had nearly killed her. "Handle it," Dante said simply, his voice carrying a finality that required no further explanation. "Quietly, for now. I want the full picture before we move against Calloway directly." "Understood," Victor said. "How is she?" Dante glanced toward Elena's still form, her chest rising and falling in steady, reassuring rhythm. Improving, slowly, but improving. On the 4th day, Elena finally opened her eyes fully, blinking against the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital room, disoriented but coherent for the first time since the surgery. Dante, who had fallen into a light doze in the chair beside her bed, startled awake instantly at the small sound of her stirring. "Elena," he said, leaning forward immediately, relief flooding his features. "Elena, can you hear me?" "Dante," she managed, her voice hoarse and weak, though her eyes focused on him with growing clarity. "Sophia, is she?" "She's fine," Dante said quickly, gently squeezing her hand. "Completely unharmed, thanks entirely to you. You need to stop worrying about everyone else and focus on yourself for once." A faint, exhausted smile touched Elena's lips. "That's not really something I know how to do." "I noticed," Dante said, something warm breaking through his careful composure for the first time in days. "Believe me, I noticed." Over the following hour, as Elena's strength slowly returned, Dante remained close, answering her careful questions about the aftermath of the attack, about Sophia's continued safety, about the retaliation already being planned against those responsible. He spoke more openly with her in that hospital room than he had with almost anyone in years. The walls he had spent a lifetime constructing finally beginning to show genuine cracks in her presence. "You stayed," Elena said quietly at one point, studying his face with quiet astonishment. "The whole time?" "I couldn't leave," Dante admitted. "Not after what you did for my sister. Not after realizing how close I came to losing you before I had the chance to understand what you'd already become to me." Elena held his gaze steadily, despite her exhaustion, despite the lingering pain still radiating through her body from 3 healing wounds. "And what have I become to you exactly?" Dante considered the question carefully, his usual guarded caution warring visibly with the raw honesty the past several days had stripped bare within him. "Someone I don't intend to let walk away easily, once you're strong enough to try." The words settled between them, quiet and significant, neither rushing to fill the silence that followed. Outside the hospital room, the city continued its restless rhythm, unaware of the transformation quietly unfolding within these walls. A hardened crime boss learning, perhaps for the first time since his mother's death, what it meant to genuinely need another person's presence in his life. Meanwhile, throughout the underworld networks connecting rival families across the city, word of Dante Rossetti's uncharacteristic devotion spread with surprising speed, carried through whispered conversations in back rooms and coded messages between associates who had never before witnessed this side of the man's reputation. Some viewed the story with skepticism, assuming exaggeration or manipulation for some hidden strategic purpose. Others recognized immediately the significance of what had occurred, that the untouchable, endlessly controlled Dante Rossetti had very nearly broken entirely over the possibility of losing someone who was, officially, nothing more than hired protection for his sister. The Calloway family, watching these developments unfold from a cautious distance, began reassessing their previous assumptions about Dante's vulnerabilities, uncertain whether this apparent weakness represented an opportunity for further exploitation or a warning sign of retaliation more dangerous than anything they had previously anticipated from a man they had underestimated for the final time. By the end of the first week, Elena had progressed enough to be moved from the intensive recovery wing into a standard hospital room, a small victory that Dante treated with the same seriousness as a major business achievement, insisting on personally overseeing every detail of her transfer, from the selection of the room's location within the building to the vetting of every staff member who would have access to her care. Sophia visited often during this period, gradually rebuilding the fragile trust and warmth that had begun growing between them before the attack. She brought Elena small comforts, a soft blanket from home, books she thought might appeal to her, updates on Margaret's cooking, and the ongoing repairs to the ballroom, still scarred by bullet holes and shattered glass, despite the cleanup crews working diligently to restore the estate to some semblance of normalcy. "You know," Sophia said during one afternoon visit, settling into the chair beside Elena's bed while Dante stepped out briefly to take an urgent call. "I've never seen my brother like this before. Not once, not even when things were at their worst after our mother died." "People change," Elena said carefully, still cautious about reading too much into the situation, given her own uncertain feelings about the growing intimacy between herself and a man whose world remained fundamentally dangerous. "No," Sophia said, shaking her head slightly. "People don't change, not really, not at their core. But sometimes they finally allow the parts of themselves they've kept hidden to surface, when the right person makes it feel safe enough to do so. I think that's what's happening with him. I think you're that person." Elena did not respond immediately, turning the observation over carefully in her mind, aware of how much weight it carried, aware too of the complications inherent in allowing herself to feel anything beyond professional loyalty toward a man who lived surrounded by violence and danger as a fundamental condition of his existence. "It's complicated," Elena finally said. "Most important things are," Sophia replied, with a wisdom that seemed to have grown considerably in the days since the attack had forced her to confront the fragile, precious nature of the people she loved. When Dante returned from his call, his expression carried the particular tightness Elena had learned to recognize as barely controlled anger, though he softened visibly the moment his eyes settled on her. "Everything all right?" Elena asked. "Business," Dante said simply, unwilling to burden her recovery with the details of retaliation planning still unfolding against the Calloway family. "Nothing that requires your attention right now. Your only job at the moment is getting stronger." "That sounds suspiciously like an order," Elena said, a faint smile touching her lips, despite the lingering exhaustion still weighing on her. "Consider it the first and only order I intend to give you from now on," Dante said, settling back into the chair beside her bed, reaching once again for her hand with a familiarity that had grown naturally over the preceding days. "After everything you've done for this family, you've more than earned the right to give the orders instead." Elena studied him quietly, noting the changes that had settled over him since the night of the shooting. a softness beneath the controlled exterior that had not been there when she first walked into his office 11 days before all of this began. "You're different than the man I met that first day," she said. "I imagine nearly losing someone tends to change a person," Dante replied. "I spent years convinced that keeping people at a distance was the only way to protect them, and myself, from the kind of loss that destroyed my mother, that shaped everything about how I built my life afterward. Watching you collapse on that ballroom floor taught me how wrong I had been. Distance doesn't protect anyone. It only guarantees that when loss finally comes, as it always eventually does in this life, you face it entirely alone." "You're not alone," Elena said softly, her fingers tightening gently around his. "No," Dante agreed, meeting her gaze with quiet certainty. "Not anymore." The conversation settled into comfortable silence after that, the kind that no longer required careful navigation of professional boundaries or unspoken tension. Outside the window, the city continued its endless rhythm of noise and movement, indifferent to the quiet transformation occurring within this single hospital room, where a woman, who had never expected to matter beyond her usefulness as protection, had somehow become essential to a man who had spent his entire adult life convincing everyone, including himself, that he needed nothing beyond power and control to survive. 3 weeks after the attack, Elena stood once again inside the Rossetti estate, still moving with careful, deliberate steps as her body continued healing from wounds that would leave permanent marks across her side and shoulder. The ballroom had been fully restored, the shattered glass replaced, the bullet holes patched and repainted so thoroughly that only someone who had witnessed the violence firsthand could still sense the ghost of that night, lingering within the room's polished walls. Elena paused at the threshold, memories of the chaos flooding back briefly, before she steadied herself and continued forward, refusing to let fear dictate her movements within a house that had, despite everything, begun to feel like something close to home. Dante found her there, standing quietly amid the restored elegance, and crossed the room to join her without a word, his hand finding hers naturally, a gesture that had become second nature to both of them over the preceding weeks. "It looks like nothing happened here," Elena said quietly. "The walls forget faster than people do," Dante replied. "But we remember, that's enough." Much had changed within the family's operations during Elena's recovery. Dante's retaliation against the Calloway family had been swift, precise, and devastating, dismantling their network of informants, seizing control of key territories that had funded their operation for years, and sending an unmistakable message throughout the city's underworld that any attempt to harm those under his protection would be met with consequences far exceeding whatever gain the attacker hoped to achieve. Nathan Pierce and Louisa, the maid who had unknowingly become entangled in the Calloway family's surveillance network, had both cooperated fully with the investigation that followed, providing information that led directly to the identification and removal of the Calloway family's leadership within the city. The details of exactly what happened next remained deliberately vague among those who worked for Dante, though the sudden and complete collapse of Calloway influence throughout the region left little doubt about the thoroughness of his response. Victor, overseeing the reorganization of the family's territorial holdings in the aftermath, found himself reflecting often on how the entire crisis had reshaped not just the balance of power within the city, but the internal culture of loyalty and trust that defined the Rossetti organization itself. Staff members who had once operated under vague, loosely enforced protocols now understood clearly the value the family placed on protecting information, and more importantly, on protecting people. Daniel, the young driver who had once frozen behind the wheel during the first attack, had grown considerably more confident under Victor's continued mentorship, eventually earning a formal position within the security team rather than remaining simply a driver called upon in moments of crisis. He credited the change entirely to that first terrifying night, when Elena's steady command had cut through his panic and given him something to hold on to beyond his own fear. "I used to think courage meant not being afraid," Daniel told Elena during one of her final physical therapy sessions at the estate, assisting her through a series of gentle exercises meant to restore strength to her injured shoulder. Watching you that night, and everything that happened after, I understand now that courage just means doing what needs to be done anyway, fear included. Margaret, too, had grown closer to Elena throughout the weeks of recovery, taking it upon herself to ensure meals arrived promptly and comfortably, fussing over details with the same quiet devotion she had shown the Rossetti family for decades. Their conversations in the kitchen became a regular fixture of Elena's days, filled with stories about the estate's history, about Dante and Sophia's childhood before tragedy reshaped their family so completely. Small fragments of understanding that helped Elena appreciate more fully the weight of what she had chosen to protect. "You've given this family something it lost a long time ago," Margaret told her one afternoon, setting a cup of tea gently in front of Elena's usual spot at the kitchen table. "Not just safety, hope that things could be different than the constant fear they've lived under for years." "I only did what anyone in my position would have done," Elena said, though the words felt increasingly inadequate against the depth of gratitude surrounding her within this household. "No," Margaret said firmly, shaking her head. "Not anyone. You. You've changed how this house operates," Victor told Dante one afternoon, reviewing updated security procedures that Elena had helped design during her recovery. Procedures far more rigorous than anything the estate had implemented before. Some of the old guard grumble about it, say things were simpler before. "Simpler isn't the same as safer," Dante said. "I'd rather deal with a few complaints than another night like Sophia's birthday." Elena's contributions to that redesign had been extensive, drawing on years of professional experience to close gaps that had allowed the Calloway family's informants to operate undetected for months. New verification protocols governed every piece of information leaving the estate. Staff underwent more thorough background checks, with ongoing monitoring rather than a single evaluation upon hiring. Schedule information for both Dante and Sophia now moved through carefully compartmentalized channels, ensuring that no single person outside immediate family and core security staff ever possessed complete knowledge of their movements in advance. Sophia, for her part, emerged from the ordeal transformed in her own quiet way. The carefree resistance to security measures that had once defined her relationship with every previous bodyguard had softened into genuine partnership with the protocols Elena had established, a recognition that safety and freedom were not necessarily opposing forces, provided the right person stood between her and the dangers of the world her family inhabited. "I used to think all of this was about control," Sophia admitted to Elena one evening, the two of them sharing tea in the estate's garden while Dante remained occupied with business matters inside. "My brother controlling my movements, my choices, my freedom. But watching what you did that night, understanding what it actually took to keep me safe, I realize now it was never about control at all. It was about love, expressed in the only language this world allows people like my brother to speak fluently." Elena considered the observation carefully, thinking of her own complicated relationship with the concept of safety, shaped by years of service in environments where protection often demanded impossible sacrifice. "Your brother loves you fiercely," she said. "Everything he's built, everything he's fought for since your mother died, all of it exists because of that love, even when it looks like something harder and colder from the outside." Sophia studied Elena for a long moment, something thoughtful crossing her expression. "You understand him in a way I don't think anyone else has managed, not even people who've known him for decades. How did you learn to see past the walls so quickly?" "I've spent my life around people who build walls for survival," Elena said. "Soldiers, guards, people who've seen enough loss to understand that vulnerability can be dangerous. Your brother isn't so different from men I served alongside years ago. The walls aren't about coldness. They're about fear disguised as control. And once you recognize that pattern, it becomes easier to see the person underneath it." "I'm glad he found you," Sophia said quietly. "Even if it took something as terrible as what happened to bring you together this way." "So am I," Elena said, and meant it completely, despite the pain and danger that had marked the path leading her to this quiet garden. this unexpected family, this life she had never anticipated choosing for herself. "I know that now," Sophia said. "I think I always knew it, somewhere underneath the resentment. I just needed something like this to strip away everything unnecessary and show me clearly what actually mattered." That evening, once Sophia had retired for the night and the estate had settled into its familiar, quiet rhythm, Dante found Elena once more in the garden, the same place where their most honest conversations had always seemed to unfold most naturally. "I have something I want to discuss with you," Dante said, his tone carrying a seriousness that immediately caught Elena's attention. "That sounds ominous," Elena said, though her voice remained light, comfortable with the familiarity that had grown so naturally between them. "Not ominous," Dante said, a rare, genuine smile crossing his features. The opposite, actually. He led her toward the estate's private study, where Victor and several of the family's senior associates had gathered, an unusual assembly that immediately signaled something significant was about to occur. Sophia emerged from a side door as well, her expression carrying quiet anticipation, suggesting she had been informed of whatever was about to happen well in advance of Elena's arrival. "Elena Marchetti," Dante began, his voice carrying the same commanding authority Elena remembered from their very first meeting, though now warmed by an unmistakable depth of genuine affection beneath the formal tone. "3 weeks ago, you took 3 bullets meant for my sister, without a moment's hesitation, sacrificing your own safety without thought of reward or recognition. In the world I come from, debts of that magnitude are rarely repaid adequately by words alone." Elena remained still, uncertain where this formal address was leading, though the gathered associates watched with quiet, respectful attention that suggested the moment carried significant weight within the family's structure. "Effective immediately," Dante continued, "I am naming you head of security for my sister, permanently, with full authority over every aspect of her protection, answerable directly to myself and no one else within this organization. This is not a temporary assignment or a gesture of gratitude alone. It is a recognition of trust that few people in my life have ever earned, and fewer still have deserved as completely as you have." A murmur of approval rippled through the gathered associates, Victor nodding firmly in agreement, clearly having anticipated and supported this decision throughout its planning. Sophia's eyes glistened with emotion as she watched Elena absorb the significance of what was being offered, a position of unprecedented trust within a family notoriously cautious about extending such authority to anyone outside their immediate bloodline. One of the senior associates, an older man named Henry Caldwell who had served the Rossetti family since Dante's father's era, stepped forward with a respectful nod toward Elena. "In all my years with this family," he said, "I have never seen Dante extend this level of trust to anyone outside blood relation. Whatever reservations some of us held about an outsider joining our ranks so completely, they were answered the moment you put yourself between gunfire and this family's future. It is an honor to welcome you properly." Elena inclined her head in gratitude, aware of how significant this moment truly was, not just for herself, but for the shifting culture within an organization that had, for generations, operated on rigid boundaries between blood and hired protection. That such boundaries could bend, even slightly, spoke to something larger than her own individual journey, a testament to the possibility that loyalty earned through genuine sacrifice could transcend the old, rigid rules that had governed this family for so long. "I don't know what to say," Elena admitted, genuinely moved by the gesture in a way she had not expected. "Say yes," Sophia said, breaking the formal atmosphere with a warm, hopeful smile. "Please. There's nobody else I would trust with this, the way I trust you." Elena looked between Sophia's hopeful expression and Dante's steady, patient gaze, understanding that this moment represented far more than a simple professional promotion. It represented acceptance into a family that had initially viewed her as nothing more than hired protection, transformed through weeks of danger and recovery into something resembling genuine belonging. "Yes," Elena said finally, her voice steady despite the emotion underlying the simple word. "Of course, yes." The room erupted into quiet celebration, Victor stepping forward to shake her hand firmly, the assembled associates offering their own congratulations, with a warmth that confirmed how thoroughly Elena had earned her place within this family's trust. Sophia embraced her carefully, mindful of her still healing wounds, while Dante watched with an expression of quiet satisfaction that betrayed the depth of relief and happiness underlying his usual composed exterior. Later that night, once the gathering had dispersed and the estate had settled once more into peaceful quiet, Dante walked Elena to the garden one final time, the same location where so much of their unexpected connection had first taken root. "This isn't just about Sophia's protection, is it?" Elena asked, studying his face carefully in the soft moonlight filtering through the trees. "No," Dante admitted. "It's about ensuring you remain close, in whatever capacity you're willing to accept. Sophia's protection was the reason I could justify it publicly, professionally, to men who would otherwise question such an unprecedented arrangement. But the truth is far simpler than official titles and formal announcements." "And what's the truth?" Elena asked softly. Dante reached for her hand, his voice quiet but certain in the stillness of the garden. "The truth is that I don't know how to imagine my life without you in it anymore. Not as a bodyguard, not as an employee, but as someone whose presence has become as essential to me as breathing. You walked into my office 11 days before nearly losing your life protecting my sister, and somewhere in that short span of time, you became the person I trust more completely than anyone else in this world." He paused, glancing briefly toward the house where a single light still burned in Sophia's window, before continuing. "My father used to tell me that a man in my position could not afford to need anyone. Need was a weakness enemies would find and use against you. For years I believed him completely, built my entire life around that principle, and told myself the isolation was simply the price of survival. But watching you fight for your life in that hospital bed, I understood finally how wrong he had been. The men who came for Sophia did not succeed because I loved my sister too openly. They succeeded because we had not built enough trust within these walls to catch the betrayal moving quietly among us. Love did not create that vulnerability. Secrecy did." "That's a hard lesson to learn at such a cost," Elena said gently. "It is," Dante agreed. "But I would rather learn it now, with you standing beside me, than continue living the way my father taught me, guarded and alone, until the day something finally breaks through anyway, as it always eventually does." Elena felt the weight and sincerity of his words settle deeply within her, recognizing in them an echo of feelings she herself had struggled to fully articulate throughout the weeks of her recovery. "I never expected this," she admitted. "Not the danger, not the recovery, and certainly not falling for a man who runs an empire built on power and fear." "And yet, here we are," Dante said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Here we are," Elena agreed, stepping closer, allowing herself finally to fully embrace the unexpected connection that had grown between them despite every reason caution might have suggested against it. As they stood together beneath the quiet night sky, the estate settled peacefully around them, finally free from the immediate threat that had once loomed so heavily over every corner of the property. The war with the Calloway family had ended, decisively and completely, but the connection forged in its violent aftermath between a fearless protector and the man whose world she had chosen to defend remained, promising a future neither of them could have anticipated when Elena Marchetti first walked into that office, unimpressed by marble floors and armed men, ready simply to do her job with the same quiet, unshakable competence that had ultimately saved far more than just one young woman's life. It had saved, in its own unexpected way, the guarded heart of a man who had long ago convinced himself he was destined to protect everyone around him while allowing no one close enough to protect him in return. In the weeks and months that followed, the Rossetti estate settled into a new rhythm, one defined not by the constant undercurrent of fear that had shaped it for years, but by a quieter, steadier confidence, built on trust, earned through fire, rather than assumed through bloodline alone. Sophia flourished under the security arrangement Elena had designed, eventually returning to the freedom of ordinary outings, art galleries, coffee shops with friends, all made possible by protocols that protected without smothering, a balance few had believed possible within a family, so long defined by extremes of either danger or restriction. Dante's reputation throughout the city shifted as well, though not in the direction his rivals had once hoped, where they had seen his devotion to Elena as weakness ripe for exploitation. The swift and total collapse of the Calloway family's influence taught every remaining rival a different lesson entirely, that a man capable of such fierce loyalty was far more dangerous, not less, than one who ruled through fear alone. Loyalty, it turned out, cut both ways, drawing devoted protection from those who earned it, and devastating consequence toward those foolish enough to threaten what he had chosen to hold dear. And through it all, Elena remained exactly where she had promised to be, standing beside Sophia through every ordinary day reclaimed from danger, and beside Dante through every quiet evening in the garden where their story had first taken root. A reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of protection are not the ones fought with weapons, but the ones that teach a guarded heart it no longer has to stand alone.